Good morning. Really great to have everybody here this morning. We're in for a treat with Erik Borlaug. I'm going to let Erik tell his story of how he became a Christian, but he didn't always believe in God and wasn't always a Christian. So it's going to be kind of an interesting story to hear how he not only became a Christian and had a strong faith, but also how he became proficient in being persuasive with others that are agnostics or atheists. So I'll give you a little bit of overview of what we're going to be doing this morning. We'll have a break after the first session. We're going to have a question and answer period. This is for the live streaming, Erik. We're going to have those that have questions line up for the microphone and ask your questions. And then we'll have a break for about 10 minutes, and then we'll come back for the second session. And give a little bit of background on Erik. He grew up in Minnesota. He was converted in Minnesota by Barry Kirkland. No, Andy Cantrell's niece. And he then went down to Nashville, where he worked under Barry Kirkland, which we've had preach here many times. And then he went to Santee, California, when Brent was down at Johnson Avenue. And his second week there, Brent gave a meeting there in Santee. So they've known each other for a while. And we heard about Erik from Jesse and Cami Haverstock, who thought very highly of him, and we were hoping that by having Erik come here, they wouldn't move away, but that didn't work out. So we're now going to be, in just a minute, he'll tell his story before he begins going through some of his material, and we'll be led in prayer by John Ramsey, who's a member of the congregation over in Woodinville and very evangelistic himself. So if you would, let's please stand, and we'll be led in prayer by John.
Lord, we want to thank you for this day. We want to thank you for our many blessings. We want to thank you for our homes and food and the freedom that we have here to be Christians and to share our faith. And Lord, help us as our society is declining in its views of Christ and Christianity and God and the Bible, and how we're really under attack by all these things. Lord, be with us this morning as Erik shares his message with us from your word and how to boldly and with courage share our faith with anyone, including those that doubt God and those that don't believe in God at all. Lord, give us the boldness, give us the courage, give us the vision, and to try to convert those to Christ that have no belief in you at all or the Bible. Help us, Lord, this morning. Help us to listen. Help us to get the answers that we need. And Lord, help us to have more faith in you ourselves as we share our faith with others. We need you, Lord. We need your grace and forgiveness for our sins, and help us to spread your love and kindness and grace and forgiveness to all those around us. In Jesus' name, amen.
Good morning. It's good to be with all of you. This is part of the country that I have always wanted to visit, and it's very beautiful. I went to the Space Needle, and the original Starbucks, since I really like coffee. I've been to a lot of the coffee shops around here, and that's been a lot of fun. You guys know how to do coffee. That's good. Lyle asked me to say a little bit about my conversion, just as it really pertains to what we're talking about this morning. My maternal grandparents, my maternal grandfather, used to work for Ronald Reagan and was a psychologist, and he did a lot of interesting work, wrote in a lot of journals and all these whatever kind of stuff. And he was around a lot of folks that thought that they were too smart for the Bible. And so he had a lot of skepticism as he trafficked around a lot of these folks. And then on the paternal side of my grandparents, my dad's, this would be my great-grandfather, was a minister in a certain denomination. And so my dad would grow up going to church all the time. And beginning maybe around age 7 or 8 or 9, he started asking questions in the Sunday school classes, such as, how do we know God exists? And why do we trust the Bible? And originally he asked those questions out of sincerity, trying to figure out answers to those things. But the teacher started to say, you need to sit in the hallway for the rest of this Sunday school class because we don't allow questions like that. So then he started asking those questions because he was just annoyed and didn't want to go to Sunday school. And so my mom and dad both grow up with this sort of background where on my mom's side there's strong skepticism, but on my dad's side there's this, we're going to go to church all the time and we're not going to really talk to you about your questions. And then eventually they meet and get married, and then they have kids, and I'm the youngest of 3. And so the kind of family that I grew up in was the kind of family that on Christmas and Easter we would go to church. There might be spurts of time where we might go for a little while, but there was always skepticism about it. It was more of like a cultural thing, like this is kind of what we're supposed to do. But whenever we would talk about the Bible, there was always some kind of reason why it wasn't reliable, and there might be a creator sort of thing. And so when I was in my first year of college, I met Andy Cantrell's niece, and at this point, I'm going to really shorten this story, but at this point in my life, I had been repenting of all kinds of things that were in my life. I had tried reading, the Gideons were handing out Bibles at my college, and I tried reading the first chapter of the Bible in the New Testament, Matthew chapter 1, and it's one of the worst things that somebody who doesn't know the Bible would try to read, because it's just a genealogy. And it confirmed to me that I'll never know anything about the Bible. So 6 months goes by, and I'm trying to search for something outside of myself that's going to satisfy my needs, which is going to be sort of what we're going to talk about this morning. And my first day of second semester, in a secular school, I'm taking a logic class, which I think will be outlawed eventually. In my logic class, the teacher said, does anybody know the first verse of the Bible? And I thought to myself, I've only tried reading Matthew chapter 1. I do have a Bible, and I'll try to go back to Genesis. So I start reading in Genesis. 2 days later, I meet Andy Cantrell's niece, and we have to partner up on a project together in a speech class. And I said, hey, I just started reading my Bible. Do you happen to be a Christian? And she said, yeah. And I said, so I've got a bunch of questions for you. And then over the course of talking to her for 3 months, she's answering my questions. But during those 3 months, I'm learning logic. And so she eventually said at one point, she said, hey, I want you to take a look at Acts 2:38 and tell me what you think about it. With her not saying anything about it, I knew because of my logic class how to read English now. It was really liberating. And so when I read Acts 2:38, I knew immediately what I needed to do. And so I was baptized. So that's the short version of a lot of that sort of thing. But what we're going to talk about this morning deals a lot with, I think, what helped me in my approach towards coming to know God. What we're going to talk about this morning is just another tool to know how to reach people. This is not like the magic bullet. I don't think any approach to evangelism is the thing. Everybody's going to have some kind of attraction to one approach over another. This is just something that I think could help us in our conversations. Maybe you've got skeptical friends, people that are agnostic, atheist, or they're just not interested in religion. These are some things that I think might help us know how to have a conversation with somebody. Maybe I don't know everybody here, so maybe you're struggling to believe, and maybe some of the things that we'll talk about this morning will help in that way as well. As I go through this presentation, I might ask just a couple questions just to get some thoughts on what you guys are thinking, but then we will have the Q&A session after I present on this information. Let me just begin with a little bit of a cultural pulse on what's going on in our nation right now. Religious decline is something that the Pew Research, Gallup polls, people have been writing a lot about for a long time, but there's some interesting new statistics that have been coming out. October 17th, 2019, Pew Research Center posted an article, and it's titled, "In the United States, Decline of Christianity Continues at Rapid Pace." Now, this is 2 years ago. And so in this research, they found that over 1 in 4 Americans are religiously unaffiliated. And in 2009, they found that at that time it was 17% of people. Now, when they say the religiously unaffiliated, what they mean by that, there's a spectrum of unbelief. The hardest kind of side of it would be like the atheist that says God does not exist. And then more in the middle would be the agnostic who says, I'm not sure. And then the least extreme of those would be somebody that's just not religiously interested, or what people have been calling the nones, N-O-N-E-S. The other kind are very religious. All right, so no more than 2 years later, Gallup poll, I don't know if any of you saw this online, but Gallup poll did some research, and they found that for the first time in the United States, less than 50% of Americans belong to a church. That's just 2 years. And they said in the article, the decline in church membership is primarily a function of the increasing number of Americans who express no religious preference. So perhaps of these over 50% of Americans that are not going, maybe some of them are still religious in some kind of way or something like that. But they're saying that the growth in these numbers is showing that there's this cultural movement away more and more from God. Now, let me just ask this question. I want to get some of your feedback on this. Why do you think that this is the state of our nation religiously? Why do you think there's more and more people leaving religion in the United States? Because in other parts of the country, religion is growing, but not in the United States right now. Why do you think it's on the decline right now? School system? Okay. Yeah, so you look at a lot of TV shows, even news networks at times will kind of say derogatory things towards religious folks. So it's kind of in the culture. It might be in the school systems, for sure colleges, no doubt. Any other reasons why you guys can think that it might be on a decline? Yeah. Yeah, the affluence that we have. I might come back to that when we talk about some of these other things, because I have an interesting story from a guy I studied with from Nigeria. Yeah.
Well, I think the media has the loudest voice, and they have the most prominent voice. They have TV, they have radio, they have most of the internet and all that. So
Right.
they're the loudest. They're the vocal minority.
Yeah, so you got the media, the radio, TV, all of these things, like these are sort of the messages that we're getting. And yeah.
People are focusing on what's bad and not the good so often. It's easy to do that. I think that's also causing a problem as we grow and develop in the younger generation.
Yes, yeah, that if it's just kind of like, if a church is just standing for what it's against, well, what are you for? And so if all you're hearing is what we don't like, what we don't like, what we don't like, then that can breed arrogance in a church, but it can also breed like, well, what is the reason that I'm here? If you're just talking about everything you don't like, so good. Yeah. Okay, good. So maybe it's like this, which can have a ripple effect within a religious community, right? If there's members that are not zealous, and I'm seeing that, well, it just looks like we're the frozen chosen or whatever. Yeah.
Our schools are teaching self-sufficiency and evolution to the point that people are being led away from anything spiritual or physical.
Okay, good. Now, okay, so all of these things that we just discussed. Oh yeah, one more comment here.
Just one more, I don't think I think it's important.
Right, good. Yeah. The comments or the questions? Oh yeah, just that he just made the comment that that critical theory is creating some barriers in how we can really even comprehend God being the power and whatnot. So very good. Okay, so let me go ahead and one of the prevailing thoughts over the last maybe 70 or 80 years, really, I guess you could really say since the Enlightenment, was that as the human mind to be able to grasp things, and as science has improved, and by the way, has science done a lot of good? Certainly it has, there's no doubting that. But that as science and human capacity to reason through things gets greater and greater, that what that is accomplishing is answering the questions that people used to need religion for. In other words, the more and more we advance, the less and less we need religion, because we can understand things scientifically now, all that sort of thing. And so what's happening, I think, in some circles is that the idea is that Christians are the ones that haven't really looked at any real evidence, like science kind of stuff. And the skeptics are the ones that are objectively minded, and they're the ones that are actually rational thinkers. Has anybody kind of felt that as being part of the cultural kind of push as well? That the reason that you guys all here are Christians is because you've got some kind of emotional need that you need to have God for. But if you just get rid of those things and then you look at what science can accomplish, what human reasoning can accomplish, then you can break free from the shackles of religion. And so this is the way that it gets painted a lot of the times, is that Mr. Atheist or Mrs. Atheist is very objectively thinking and very rational. And then Mr. or Mrs. Christian is just not very rational at all, just has a lot of emotional needs. Look at something that Aldous Huxley, by the way, this presentation that I'm giving right now is not like a normal sermon that I do, just so you know that. Okay, so Aldous Huxley wrote a book, Ends and Means. He was an English philosopher, atheist. Look what he says about the reason that he was a skeptic. He says, the philosopher who finds no meaning in the world, this meaninglessness, we'll say more about that in just a moment, is not concerned exclusively with a problem in metaphysics. He is also concerned to prove that there is no valid reason why he personally should not do as he wants to do. For myself, the philosophy of meaningless was essentially an instrument of liberation, sexual and political. All right, so here's what Aldous Huxley is saying in this book. He's saying, I've got emotional reasons why I didn't want to believe in God. What are his emotional reasons? He wants to do what he wants to do. Now, I just finished a book this morning by Friedrich Nietzsche is how you're supposed to say it, Nietzsche. So I just finished a book by him this morning, and one of the things that he argued about was that the belief in God, or this idea of God, is just crude. It just is gross to him. And so you've got people like Aldous Huxley, you've got people like Friedrich Nietzsche, you've got these other folks that there's emotional reasons. And I'll tell you that in Atlanta, where I've been, you guys are familiar with Meetup, right? Meetup.com, where you do these studies. So I've been doing, I created a Meetup group specifically for atheists and agnostics. And the first wave of people that I studied with, it was interesting because I asked them, okay, tell me about your religious background. Every single one of them that came said something like, I had a really bad experience at a church, or I grew up with parents that were very domineering about their religion, and they didn't understand grace at all, which I kind of thought Jesus had some of that going on in all this. So they had some kind of really bad experience, which became the seeds for their unbelief, which means that the infancy of their unbelief came not from strong rationality, but came from an emotional reaction. And so for people that would say that that the Christian is the one that's emotional thinking, and the skeptic or the atheist is the one that's the rational thinker, that's not totally true. I've got emotional reasons for wanting to believe in God, but the atheist has got emotional reasons for not believing in God. Emotions are part of who we are. And they can draw us towards God or away from God. And so you kind of have to clear the playing field in that way. Now, when I started to understand that there's emotional reasons for unbelief, it started to change the way that I approached skeptics. Because it used to be the case, whenever I was studying with skeptics, they'd say, well, I don't know if I believe in God or the Bible. Okay, well, here's 16 arguments why you should believe in God. And here's 55 reasons from archaeology why the Bible's reliable. All of that stuff is very valid. I'm not taking away from that in any way. But let me suggest this, that if I'm sitting across the table from Mr. Atheist, and what's really behind his unbelief is an emotional thing, whether it's he wants to do, he had a bad experience, whatever. And I'm giving him objective reasons for the faith. Here's objective arguments for God. Here's objective evidence from archaeology, all this kind of stuff. Am I meeting him where he's at? No. Because what's behind the sophisticated sounding arguments are emotions that need to be addressed and dealt with. So when I've studied with skeptics, I've started asking questions like, okay, well, I see you've read Richard Dawkins, I see that you know Friedrich Nietzsche, and you know all these other folks, and you're going to say a lot of these arguments that I'm going to want to attack, and start talking about those things that you said. But let me be honest with me, please, and tell me, is there something that the Bible says that's repulsive to you? Or is there some reason why you don't want to serve God? And that's usually, I would say 75% of the time, where the real discussions lie. And so what I try to do, I have a series of 5 or 6 sessions that I'll do with the skeptics initially. And then we kind of transition after class 5 or 6, and we start talking about some other things, and I'll walk through how this works in just a moment. But in the first 5 or 6 classes, what I'm trying to accomplish is trying to remove the emotional barriers that they have for unbelief. By helping people understand that Christianity fits the deepest needs that we all have. We all have a need for meaning and identity and a basis for morality, and we all need a sense of hope. We all have these things. So you get people to look within themselves and say, these are the things that I kind of feel like I was built to need. And so what I do then is I say, okay, let's look at your secular worldview and ask the question, how well does your worldview do at giving you meaning in life? And then let's compare that to the Christian worldview. And in the process, what you find is that some people just have not thought through the logical consequences of their worldview. Now, that's the approach. And when I do this, when Paul, there's 2 times in the book of Acts when Paul was preaching to pagans who didn't know the Old Testament. Acts 14 and Acts 17, when he was at the Areopagus. When he was at the Areopagus, how many Bible passages did he quote? None. How many Greek poets did he quote? It was 2. So what he's doing is he's quoting their Bible, their authorities, who, by the way, oftentimes make the points that skeptics need to hear. And so what I've done is I have read a lot from atheists and skeptics. And what I do when I read them is I'm reading them in context. I'm trying to respect the context like you would when you're quoting any Bible passage. And I use these quotes as my discussion starters in my discussions with atheists. Now, what I'm about to do, we're going to start with our need for meaning. I'm going to go through our need for meaning, identity, a basis for morality, and hope. Just 4 of the needs that we have as human beings. And I'm going to compare the secular worldview to the Christian worldview. Each one of these things that I'm about to go through, we spend over an hour discussing. So we're just going to go really quick through this, but you'll get a sense of how this works. And you might be wondering in this, okay, well, I'm not going to read from a bunch of atheists and skeptics, so how is this going to be a tool for me? One thing I would suggest is that as we go through this, you can just be thinking to yourself, how can I start imagining what it would be like to be a skeptic. And how could I prompt somebody to think more deeply about the consequences of their worldview? You don't even need to know all these quotes. But when I'm getting together with people, right now I'm meeting with 5 atheists. 4 of them are Emory students, so they take pride in all these philosophical classes. So I got to quote their people. But if you don't know people that are into reading all of these kind of people, that's fine. You'll get ideas on what kinds of questions to ask people. Does that make sense? Okay, so let's start out with our need for meaning. Well, what do we mean by our need for meaning? To have meaning implies that I'm here for some purpose. So I'm looking backwards, like what are my origins? Why am I here? But meaning also has something to do with what am I leaving after I die? What's my legacy? Is what I'm doing counting for anything? And so when I started doing this with the group of atheists I'm meeting with right now, they're like, yeah, that's what meaning is. That I'm here for some reason and that what I do counts for something after I'm gone, that kind of thing. That's what meaning is. Okay, so then what we do is we say, okay, under the secular worldview that doesn't believe God, what is your meaning in life? And rather than me saying, you guys have no meaning, what I do is I quote from an atheist, Stephen Jay Gould, died in 2002, but he said this in Life magazine. He said, "We are here because one odd group of fishes had a peculiar fin anatomy that could transform into legs for terrestrial creatures. Because the earth never froze entirely during an ice age. We may yearn for a higher answer, but none exists. This explanation, though superficially troubling, if not terrifying, is ultimately liberating and exhilarating. We must construct these answers for ourselves." Now, it was really interesting. So I'm giving you one quote. When I studied with the skeptics a couple weeks ago, I had 2 quotes from atheists, one of them from Bertrand Russell, one of them was this quote. And I said, okay, in your worldview, your people say there's no objective meaning. There's no meaning outside of yourself. You have to construct it for yourself. We'll talk about that in a second. And they said, yep, that's right. We have no meaning in life. Like, whoa, okay. So if I would have just came to them and said, you guys have no meaning, how do you think they would have responded? Yeah, we do. Okay, so how about I just quote their Bible? And they go, yep, that's right. We have no meaning in life outside of anything that we get to construct our meaning for ourselves. Now, if you were to talk to a skeptic and they would say to you, like, I do have meaning in life. And by the way, they do have meaning. There are things that they find value in and all this sort of thing. But we have to deconstruct how they try to find meaning. So let's say that your meaning in life is whatever you would like it to be. What would be some examples of some things that people would say, well, I don't believe in God. I don't think I'm made in God's image, all this kind of stuff. But I do have meaning. I'm here for a reason. And what I'm going to do is going to count forever or count for some degree of time. What would be some things that you think people in our society would say, this is my meaning in life, if they're not a religious person? Yeah, sport of charity, family. Yeah, pleasure. It could be a variety of a lot of different things. Now, what's the problem with that? What's the problem with saying, well, my meaning in life is... Now, there's a lot of problems, and when I have this discussion with people, we do this in much more detail, and we bring up more things that I'm going to bring up right now. But let's say that I make my career my meaning in life. I was just built to be this, and all the writings that I do and everything, that these things are going to be my lasting legacy. What's the problem with that being my meaning in life? What happens when my company goes under? What happens when I start to get older and I'm thinking as a preacher and my hearing goes bad, so I can't even teach a Bible class and I can't hear people's comments, or my seeing goes bad, my eyes go bad, so I can't even read the Bible. And what if you put your meaning in something that's in this life? Do you know how fragile that is? If I put my meaning in my family, my wife is pregnant with number 4 right now. And she said that it's the easiest pregnancy she's ever had, which scares me because that might mean she wants to have 5. I don't know. But if I put my meaning in my family, one car accident can take my meaning in life away. And so you might find some degree of pleasure in this, that, or the other thing in your family or your career. You don't know how long that's going to last, and you don't know how fragile that is. And by the way, every time you're tempted to really enjoy your meaning in life, if you're a skeptic, you have to tell yourself, you have to ignore the thoughts in your mind that say, this is just all happening because my synapses in my brain are just firing in these ways, and it's really irrational why I'm attracted to these things. But that you can't think too deeply about that stuff. Otherwise, it's just too depressing. All right, so what does the Christian worldview have to offer with being satisfied with the meaning that we have? Why are we here? You're made in the image of God. Now, we're going to come back to this image of God thing for several of these things that we're talking about. But to be made in God's image, remember, there's times in the Bible where God would say, make no graven image. But that same Hebrew word for image is described for human beings, that we are made in God's image. Have you ever known that before? So God says, make no graven images of me. But then he makes an image of himself. Of all the things that God created, what is the only thing that can adequately represent God? It's you. Made in God's image. It doesn't matter what skin color you are. It doesn't matter how short or tall you are. It doesn't matter what your political beliefs are. Everybody is made in God's image. Now, on my phone, I've got a picture of a sunset at La Jolla Beach in San Diego, where we used to live. And it's an image of a sunset. It's not literally the sunset, but it points to the sunset, and it reminds me of the sunset. All of you have got apps on your phones, because everybody's got smartphones now, and the app that has the letter F on it and its blue background is Facebook. It's an icon or an image of the thing that points to the app. I don't have Facebook anymore. It was just too volatile. But we've got like all of these apps and all these different images that point to a different reality or a deeper reality beyond the sign itself. So what is the reason that human beings are here? We are here to image God. That's very dignifying. But part of meaning also means that there's some kind of legacy that I leave. There's some kind of lasting thing that matters in what I do. Humanistic efforts can only go so far, and there's a lot of good things that can happen in humanistic efforts. You have to make sure that they don't get tinged with human philosophy. There's always that kind of concern. But the Christian who's teaching other people the gospel, the Christian that's encouraging fellow brethren, you're making an eternal impact in the life of other people. So even when this earth gets burned up, your meaning in life is very robust, because no matter what kind of suffering happens in this world, no matter what kind of car accidents or what happens to the company you work for, the world's suffering can never take you away from your meaning. 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 20 and 21. What credit is it if when you sin and are beaten for it, you endure? But if you do good and suffer for it, you endure. This is a gracious thing in the sight of God. For to this you have been called, because Christ also suffered for you, leaving you an example so that you might follow in his steps. For the Christian, we can suffer and suffer and suffer, and it does not ever take away our meaning in life. From an emotional standpoint, now we're just dealing with emotions right now. Subjective, by the way, these things that we're talking about right now, I like to call these subjective evidences for the faith. And then after you've gone through the subjective evidences and the emotional barriers to belief are cleared, then you can talk about the objective stuff, archaeological evidence, arguments for God, all of that kind of stuff. You got to deal with the subjective stuff right now with how our people are thinking in our society. So which worldview is more emotionally satisfying for meaning? The secular worldview says there's no meaning, you get to create it for yourself. Bertrand Russell says that anytime you start suffering, then you know that your meaning in life has been taken away. The Christian worldview says you're made in God's image and what you do counts forever. So that's check mark on Christianity. Next one is our need for identity. What is identity? All of us have different hats that we wear, like husband or cousin or niece or nephew or whatever your job title is at work or whatever some of your hobbies are. Like all of us have got different things. I'm a Philadelphia Eagles fan. I know some of you like the Seahawks. I've heard of them or something like that. And so everybody's got different hats that they wear. Your identity is what is identical about you in every hat you wear. So when I'm a husband, when I'm a father, when I'm a preacher, when I'm whatever I am, what's the thing that's true about me in every single scenario? That's what identity is, whatever is identical about you, no matter what hat you're wearing. All right, so that's identity. What is the secular approach? Now, the secular approach can be subdivided into two things, the traditional approach and then the more modern approach. The traditional approach to identity and figuring out like who I am works from the outside in. Let's say, for example, that I lived in a society 300, 400, 500,000 years ago. My sense of who I was determined by society, and if I didn't like it, I had to work it into my heart and change my heart. So as an example, let's say that you grew up in the 1500s and Daddy owned a farm. What was it expected that you would do? Oh, I want to be a painter, though, or an artist, or I want to be a musician. Nope, sorry. Your identity is these things that are expected of you. By the way, anybody heard of Frozen? It was this movie that came out 8 years ago now. Can you believe that? You know the beautiful song with Elsa and all the twirling that she does and all whatever. The song "Let It Go" shows this approach to identity, where she says, I'm not going to sing this. Don't let them in, don't let them see, be the good girl you always have to be, conceal, don't feel, don't let them know. You realize that when she's singing this, that she's talking about the traditional approach to identity, that everybody's expecting this of me, and I gotta hold it all in, and I just gotta conform. Okay, that's the ancient approach, the traditional approach. The modern approach is the inside out. It's the exact opposite. Where in our culture today, the way that you get a sense of identity and who you are is, this is what I feel, and you all better accept it. That's the idea. Now I yelled there a little bit, because can't you feel that in our culture? That you all better start celebrating it, and whatever it might be. You might be thinking of one particular issue, but this applies to like every sense of how people try to find identity in our culture today. This is who I feel like I am. And by the way, this song in Frozen, did you know that just how philosophical this song is? Because it works from the traditional approach, and then when she finally is free in the song, then she works to the modern approach where she says, well, now they know, let it go, can't hold it back anymore, let it go. Turn away and slam the door, I don't care what they're going to say. Do you see how the song works from the traditional approach to the modern approach? And to let it go in the song means I will now be true to who I am. And so I show this to skeptics, and so I'm not quoting, some deep philosopher here, but this is a cultural thing. Like we see this in our culture. And you can ask, okay, well, which approach is your family kind of operating under? Is it more the traditional approach, or are you going along more with like the modern inside-out approach? You kind of determine who you are for yourself, whatever. What's the main problem with this modern approach? I want to be true to myself, and everybody better accept it. Well, for one reason, it can be very unreliable. Because let's say, for example, that I want to move to New York City, and I want to have a really great career. But at the same time, I kind of want to have a wife and kids, and I want to be a family man too, but my job is requiring like 85 hours a week of work and all. What if I've got conflicting desires within me? Because whenever I look within me and I go, well, this is what I want, or that's what I want, there might be things that I can't have both of these things that I really want. I sort of have to choose one or the. So how do I figure this out? It's really confusing. So there's that problem to it. But also I would suggest that this modern approach is really just an illusion. Can the Christian be true to himself or herself right now? Can I just be true to my beliefs and like everybody will just embrace me in society? No, you can't do that. But what if people keep saying, be true to yourself, be true to yourself, be true to yourself, and somebody goes like, I'm just using my wife as an example right now. My wife is living her dream. She's always wanted to have kids. She has always wanted to stay home She's not a career woman. That's just not who she is. And she's not judging any woman that is a career woman. This is just what she's always wanted to do. And so what if, do you suppose that in the 1950s, if she lived back then, that there wouldn't be as much like cultural push, like what she's doing is fine for her? In our day and age, do you think that somebody like my wife who wants to do what she's doing right now, do you think there's a little bit more like, people kind of think I should have done this or that or gotten this degree or that degree or something like that? Traditional approach in this, and this doesn't really work either. So then we have to ask the question, well, what does Christianity offer for a sense of identity? And I think the most succinct passage in the New Testament that helps us with this is 1 Corinthians 4, verses 3 and 4. In the context, you've got Paul dealing with the divisions in Corinth, where some are following Paul, some are following Apollos, and he's trying to help the congregation know how to think about preachers. And he says this in 1 Corinthians 4, verses 3 and 4. But with me it is a very small thing that I should be judged by you or by any human court. In fact, I do not even judge myself. For I'm not aware of anything against myself, but I am not thereby acquitted. It is the Lord who judges me. All right. Do you see how Paul is rejecting both the traditional and the modern approach here? He says to the Corinthians that are making all these judgments about preachers and how Paul is, he's kind of weak when he's preaching to them and all this kind of, but his letters are weighty. He says, I don't care what you guys think about me. It's a very small thing to me what you guys think. And then you might expect him to go, I only care what I think about myself. But then what does he say here? I'm not aware of anything against myself, but I'm not thereby acquitted. In other words, Paul's saying, my conscience is pretty good about the work I'm doing and all this kind of, but that doesn't, just because I feel good about myself, that doesn't mean that before the Lord I'm acquitted. So I don't care what you think about me. I don't care what I think about me. Who is it that he cares about the opinion of? What the Lord thinks about him. Now, tomorrow morning, I will expand on this concept right here and show in more detail how the Bible's answer to our need for identity and what God says about us is much more robust than me relying on my unstable emotions and desires to try to figure out who I am. All right, so that's our need for identity. Next one is our need for morality. Everybody lives with some kind of sense of moral obligation. And when I say moral obligation, it's not just, this is what I think is right for me. It's that I think this is objectively right for everybody. So racism is wrong objectively. Murder is wrong objectively. Those are things that people will try to fight for so that people understand those things in our society and stuff like this, even if they don't believe in God. So here's the first thing to say about this. What is the secular approach to morality? By the way, let me just say one thing very quickly about this. The group of skeptics that I'm studying right now, do you realize that in the atheistic community, one of the things that they get very annoyed with is when a Christian assumes that they're extremely immoral. I joked with some of the atheists that I studied with this a couple weeks ago when we talked about some things dealing with morality. I'm like, I bet all of you guys have just murdered a bunch of people, right? They knew I was joking. Like it's a funny kind of discussion that we have in some ways. We try to keep the humor up so that the tensions are a little lower. Can atheistic people do morally good things? Yes, they can. Now, you might want to say, well, your reason for doing it wasn't because of God. And yeah, okay, whatever. But if you just talk about the actions, there's a lot of secular people that can do a lot of morally good things. So that's not the beef that I have with this. The problem is, what is your basis for the morality you care about? That's the issue. So, how do secular people come to terms with why they should be moral? And here, they've got a couple answers to this, by the way. The first one is that morality has come about because of naturalistic evolution. That evolution has grown to a point where we need to care about helping the weak and equal human rights and all of this sort of thing. Now, when I said earlier that the secular worldview, that there's emotional reasons for the secular worldview. Can I demonstrably prove to you that God exists right now? Can I just like snap my fingers and here he is? No, it's not like it requires faith. We've got evidence for this, but we have to have faith, right? The secular worldview involves a lot of faith. One of the best ways to show this, by the way, is to say your worldview says that we came about from the strong eating the weak. Why do you care about helping those who are less fortunate than you? If you care about it, that's great. That's not my point. My point is that your worldview does not give you the basis for it. Because we came about from the strong eating the weak, so why help those who are less fortunate? That's one problem with this. Thomas Nagel is an atheist. And he wrote a book called Mind and Cosmos. And it's an atheist critiquing and criticizing evolution. Because he says that we've gotten to a point now, neurologically, how we understand the brain and all this kind of stuff, where it's just clear that Darwinian evolution can't be a real thing. And here's one of the reasons for that. He says this: if evolutionary biology is a physical theory, as it is generally taken to be, then it cannot account for the appearance of consciousness and of other phenomena that are not physically reducible. You see his point here? His point here is to, and by the way, I've got sheets of paper with these. Whenever I meet with the atheists, I put all these quotes on a piece of paper with all the footnotes. They're all, you can see where I found all of these quotes and everything like that. If you guys want me to email any of those to you or whatever, I can do that. But this is one of my favorite quotes. This is a short book. He's saying here that evolutionary biology is a physical theory. You know what that means? That it's just synapses firing. It's all chemicals that are changing from one thing to another. But the concern for morality and the ability to consciously think, they seem like immaterial things. So how does a material process create the immaterial consciousness and the immaterial concern for morality? So the first approach to secular morality is say, well, you know, we evolved to a point to need to care about morality and all this kind of, it doesn't fit what evolution is in two different ways. So there's the problems with that. So then we have to ask the question, there's the other approach, that morality comes from social consensus, which is, I just don't know why anybody uses that argument anymore. Nazi Germany is always the example for that one. Slam dunk, we got that one. Okay, so what is the Christian approach to morality? By the way, one of the big struggles that skeptics have is that Christians are hypocrites. Is that true sometimes?
Yes.
Yeah. Can you see why that would bother somebody? Yeah. One thing that I point out in these studies is that that Christianity offers the best resources for morality. My argument is not Christians are the most moral people. Christians, by the way, are the best people I've ever met. But sometimes there's hypocrites, and those ones make the news, and those ones create problems for people. And so, but one of the struggles that everybody has, this is just a universal struggle that everybody has, whether you're atheist or Christian, everybody struggles to be consistent with their worldview, 100%. Everybody does. If you're an atheist, you care about helping the weak, but you're believing that based on faith. So everybody struggles with being consistent with their worldview. But what are the resources that Christianity offers for morality? That's the question. Well, you can't determine if anything is good or bad. You can't make a judgment about something, good or bad, unless you know what it's for. So here's this clicker. See this thing? What if I saw a nail somewhere and I needed to pound the nail back in so it wasn't sticking out, wasn't creating dangers and everything like that. And I try using this thing for it. And then it breaks in the process, so then I contact Logi, whatever this company is, I don't even know how to say that. And I go, you guys make terrible hammers. They go, that's not what it's for. It's for clicketizing things and stuff. like that. Why are you trying to use it for that? If you don't know what the purpose of this is, how can you assess whether it's good or bad? It's kind of funny. People talk about people being good or bad. Well, what's our purpose? Like, why are we, how can you make that assessment unless you know what somebody's purpose is? And we talked about purpose, meaning in just a moment ago, but we have a clear sense of purpose. We're made in God's image. We're supposed to be imagers of God. So when I'm patient and kind and loving, and when I rebuke the way that God wants me to rebuke, all of that is supposed to be a picture of God. We have a clear sense of purpose, morally speaking. And something else to say about that is that our morality, therefore, flows from God's character. It doesn't flow from like these things that I feel like might be good or bad or social contracts or whatever. For Christians, we've got a very robust sense of why morality matters. So that's the discussion on morality. The last one that we'll talk about this morning is hope. All of us live our present reality based on what we think about the future. So I remember when my wife and I, Samantha, were moving to San Diego, we took one car out there and we were like looking up pictures of San Diego. We were thinking about all the good Mexican food that we were going to find. And it was just like, so we kept daydreaming about what's it going to be like, and it gave us strength to get through the car ride, which was a very long car ride. All of us live with this sense of what's going to happen in the future and what does that mean for me right now? So, what's the secular approach to hope? By the way, before we even try to think about what this secular approach is, do you think our society does a good job of instilling hope? What would be the evidence of that? And by the way, these are the kinds of things that you could, like if you don't know the skeptics and atheists and what they've written, that's fine. What's the evidence around us that our society does a pretty poor job of instilling hope? Here's some statistics. From 1999 to 2014, the overall suicide rate rose 24%. I had one of my best friends from high school 3 weeks ago tried to commit suicide. Talked to him on the phone. He is doing better right now, but there's obviously still reason to be concerned. He's not a Christian. So the suicide rates are rising. Have you noticed that there's like a period of time where there's not a lot of movies being made right now, but a lot of the movies that were being made were like dystopian in nature? It's like even in our art, it's like dark and all this kind of stuff. Like it's this reflection of what's going on. So clearly our society doesn't do a very good job of instilling hope. But what is the basis of the secular worldview? Some people say, well, my hope is to just leave the world a better place. That I just hope that when I'm gone, I've made some mark or some impact on the world where I've just made things better. Maybe you will, but then Ecclesiastes inoculates us with reality, and it says this in Ecclesiastes 1:15, what is crooked cannot be made straight, and what is lacking cannot be counted. There's things in this life, in this world, that are so beyond repair that you might spend your whole life. I listened to an interview with somebody not too long ago, who he lives in San Francisco, I think, and he's about all this anti-aging stuff, that the mark I want to leave is so that people can live to be like 200 years old. In this broken world, you want that? It was God's grace that he made those cherubim not let people get back into the Garden of Eden. In this world, the way that it is. But you might try to put all your efforts into these things that are crooked. You will never make them straight. As long as there are earthly powers and principalities, there's always going to be corruption that derives from ungodly leaders and all these different kinds of things. You might be a voice. You might help one nation for a little bit of time or something like that. But imagine this for a moment. Imagine that you're on an airplane and you know it's about to crash. You've got 15 minutes before it crashes. Both engines went out, so it's just kind of coasting until it crashes. And in the meantime, you go to the bathroom in the plane, because you just got to do that. And so you go to the bathroom and you realize that the light in the bathroom's not working. And then you get out of the bathroom after you've washed your hands and everything like that, whatever. And you go to the steward person and you go, the light, we've got to fix the light. What does she say or he say? It doesn't matter because this thing's going down. What's going to happen to this life? We're all, in the secular worldview, it's all gone. So why does it really matter that you're going to try to leave the world a better place on a plane that's going to crash? That's one problem with that. But somebody, okay, so that's one secular approach to hope. I'm going to leave the world a better place. Here's another approach, that you have to accept death as a natural part of life. When Samantha and I were in San Diego, for my preaching week, what I try to do is I work between services on Sundays, because it's already a work day for me. And then I try to take Thursday and Friday off. That's just how I like to do it. Different preachers do it differently. And so our tradition in our family in San Diego was every Friday we went to a coffee shop. We tried different ones. We found our favorite ones. And there was one time when Samantha and I and Abigail and Asher were at this coffee shop. And there was a woman there who started talking to us. And she worked as a hospital psychologist or a hospital care person to try to help instill some kind of hope or confidence as people were on their way out, going to breathe their last breaths. And she said, I want to understand, like, what is the Christian worldview of death? And I said some things about that. And I said, so what's your view? And she said, well, I think it's just a natural part of life. And that, is it Mufasa? There's a lot of Disney things that are really helpful. Is the cycle of life, where it's like you die, and then like worms and maggots eat your flesh, and then or you make a flower or whatever with your body after you're buried. So for some people, they say, well, I just have to accept death is a natural part of life, and that as I accept that, then I can just rejoice knowing that my decomposing body will go back into the world and nourish something. And so that's really satisfying. The problem with this, okay, well, that's just obvious. You don't even have to deconstruct that. It's just like, what? But you could do is you could talk to an atheist or agnostic person and say, what's your hope in life? I want to leave this world a better place. Have you thought about that this is a plane that's about to crash? Have you thought about like death being a natural part of life? It just kind of seems like that doesn't fit our instincts. Like the Bible still says death is an enemy. Jesus has conquered it. But the moment of death, I have to guess, is going to be one of those things that feels like an enemy intruding in on me right now. It just doesn't feel like it fits who we are. So the Christian worldview, 1 Thessalonians 4, verses 16 and 17. For the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a cry of command, with the voice of an archangel, and with the sound of the trumpet of God, and the dead in Christ will rise first. Then we who are alive, who are left, will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and so we will always be with the Lord. Buddhism and pantheistic religions teach that when you die, you lose all consciousness. So in pantheistic religions, that's where the Avatar movie with the blue people, not Aang, the airbender guy, that's like the cool one. But the blue people one, that movie is very pantheistic. Where like if you cut down a tree, you're hurting God because God is built into everything, the Brahma and all the whatever kind of stuff. And so they believe that you are part of this living organism, which is this whole world. Like you have God in you. And so when you die, you just go back into like your material goes back into this God kind of thing. In other words, one of the dissatisfying things about that is that you stop being you. Did you notice that in this text, it says that when we are caught up together, we will be with the Lord. He's using this word, we will always. Who's the we? You mean I still get to be me, but in a perfected state? That's very different from any other religion. That's different from the secular worldview. That's very satisfying. I would like to still be me. I don't want to go feed the trees and all this kind of stuff. But it's not just that I still get to be me, but in verse 17, that we get to be with one another because we're caught up together with them in the clouds. So it's going to be like a reunion. I've been a Christian for 13 years now. And since being a Christian, I haven't known many Christians that have fallen away yet. I'm still younger and all that sort of thing. But I've been to funerals of Christians. And the way that people have touched, remember the death of Dorcas in Acts chapter 9, where this woman dies and everybody's bringing all these like things that she made for them and everything. And she gets resurrected in that story. But you think about all the godly people that have left some tangible mark in your life, and that you still get to be you, that person still gets to be that person, and you all get to be together with the Lord, who is the light of the world, the good shepherd, a refuge for the oppressed. He's the perfect Father, the God of peace, the God of grace. He's the Redeemer. He's all these different things that the Bible pictures him as, and you get to be with him forever. Which worldview offers a more robust sense of having hope? Leave the world a better place. It's a plane that's crashing. My body gets to feed a plant. Great. Or I get to still be me, and I get to be me with the other people that I love, with the God who is the God of all love. Now, we just have gone through 4 different needs. Does any of this prove Christianity to be true? No, it doesn't. This is subjective evidence that when you look within yourself, do you see that Christianity gives you what you're looking for? And then if you can walk through, and by the way, in the Q&A discussion, we might talk about like other needs you could discuss, like our need for belonging and community, our need for satisfaction. Like these are other things that you could also discuss with skeptics. But you see, what the purpose of going through these things is if you have an emotional disgust with Christianity, would this stuff help alleviate some of the emotional disgust that you have for Christianity? Yeah. So if at this point you're studying with a skeptic and you've gone through these things that you know you need and Christianity offers it in a better kind of way, if what you hope, and you're an atheist, if what you're hoping is, or what you're thinking is that Christianity sounds like a nice fairy tale, you see the beauty in it, you're actually in a pretty good place. Because now you're ready for the objective evidences, you're ready for the archaeological evidence, you're ready for the logical, and there's not this emotion, this emotional rejection of all of it undergirding the discussion. You've cleared those things away now. Does that make sense? Okay, all right, I think we're gonna take a break now, and then we'll come back and do some Q&A, or we call it Q&R, question and response, because I might not have the answers. We're just gonna do, what is it, a 5-minute break? Oh, you guys get 10 minutes. All right, so 10-minute break, and then we'll come back, and then we'll discuss some questions for 45 minutes or something.